So, questions and answers. We are very much accommodating questions from our very friends from different faiths, and this is given much priority in the very first setting. So, tip number one as well, any question that is given forth from the audience has one follow-up to entertain as much questions as possible. So with that being said, are there any questions from the floor? Yes, please.
Thank you for the very insightful talk. You're, mashallah, very eloquent and you know how to convey a message correctly, so thank you for that. You mentioned something about divorced women being basically paid for continuing breastfeeding the man's child. Can you elaborate on that more? Because I've never heard of this before and I found it very interesting.
Yeah, so it's mentioned in Surah Talaq, which is chapter 65 of the Quran, that if the woman does not want to breastfeed for the man, then another woman will breastfeed her instead. In other words, it's a shared responsibility. And Surah Al-Baqarah as well, the pronouns that are used when it refers to breastfeeding are always in the Arabic a dual pronoun, which is, it means or it implies that there is a consultative process between the man and the woman in this regard. And so many scholars obviously say that in divorce cases, if the woman is breastfeeding, then that she is owed payment for that. The man has to give her money for the breast milk that she's giving the child. And what I was saying, that even within marriage, I've seen some opinions that say that should be the case as well. However, because it's both of their child, right? And she is expressing something from her body, which is obviously painful for a lot of women as well. And she does not need to, or she does and he doesn't do. And so the Shara or Islamic rulings, to a great extent, accommodate for that. And it does indicate also to the fact that Islam doesn't see a woman's body as the property of a man, which is a very important point. It's a fundamental point. We don't see that a woman, a married woman, is the property of her husband. So all of these things, and that's a very straightforward thing to say, but it's important to show with live examples how it is the case, and implementably, how, through implementation, how that is actually contextualized. But there's a long jurisprudential discussion on that, which I think would require a little bit more research. But the short answer is definitely, yes, definitely there is provision for that in the Quranic discourse, let alone the Hadith discourse.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
So you made a poignant case for, you've analyzed kind of the logical incongruities of a radical branch of feminism, or feminism in general can be considered as radical. But my first question really would be, would you consider that the underlying thought of there being a patriarchy in society as warranted?
This is something, it's a very good question, because the microphone wasn't on. He was talking about the idea of a patriarchy, and is it a warranted one? Yes. I don't agree with the idea of a patriarchy in the reduced sense of the second feministic discourse, and I'll tell you why. Because what they're talking about when they're referring to patriarchy, in a nutshell, is the treatment of white men respective to white women. They're not talking about the fact that for 400 years, for instance, it's an easy counterfactual thesis. For 400 years or 500 years in America, there were black slaves. Yes? Now, those men, those black men, in the hierarchy, in that societal hierarchy, where were they positioned? Were they positioned higher or lower than men, or than women? They were positioned in no doubt whatsoever, lower than white women. So, if what is referred to as a patriarchy is this meta-narrative of men have been oppressing women throughout time, it's reductionist, it's problematic, because it doesn't account for the fact that you had, for instance, white women benefiting and acquiescing to a large extent to race-based or racial slavery, which meant that black men were exploited alongside black women as well, alongside black children. So the issue is, with the patriarchy, it doesn't look at all of those things. And I think you'll find that with the intersectional kind of analysis, they realize that. Marxist feminists have realized that a long time ago, to be honest with you. They said, look, it's not just about gender, it's about class as well. You can't compare a middle-class white woman with a working-class black man in America and think that that black man is part of a patriarchy with other white men against that white woman. It's not the case. You know, in most cases, that black man is being oppressed through a capitalistic system of segregation, and that white woman is part of it knowingly or unknowingly. So the patriarchy does not answer all the questions. In fact, it brings more questions to the table. We explained already how the idea of there being a social expectation of men going to war and killing and dying for women, essentially, is not seen as matriarchal. Why is it not seen as matriarchal? That is a social construct, according to you. Right? If it's a social construct, it's one that advantages women over men, and in fact puts men in that position of sacrifice for the benefit of women. So if that's the case, how could that be referred to as a patriarchy? You could argue it is a patriarchy. How? Because the man, by virtue of the fact that he's doing all of those things, when he is successful, if he is successful in war, certainly that man is going to be celebrated more in a society than the woman. Definitely. But the question is, if you believe in the meritocracy, should that be the case or not? Yes, because if you believe in the meritocracy, it's justified. He killed him, amputated his arm, this and that, fight in war. He didn't do that, right? But then the question is, that's assuming that women have nothing to do with war, which is false. So it is a bit of an entanglement, yes? What I'm saying is that the meta-narrative of women being oppressed by men is reductionist. It doesn't take into consideration religion, class, socioeconomic background, geopolitics, historical time period, or any of those. It's just something, a catchphrase, sloganeering, and so on. Yes?
Just as a follow-up,
So as a follow-up, I didn't phrase my first question as carefully as I'd like to. I wasn't talking about the concept of a tyrannical patriarchy as an oppressive one.
Okay.
But if you accept that through these the biological necessity that you're talking about, the reasons of war and different roles in
Yes.
trying to combat the suffering of life between men and women to move forward in societies, that there is a patriarchy that is developed, that isn't malicious in its nature, but it does lead to men being in higher roles at the end of it, and women being in lower ones, which isn't, maliciously intended. It isn't men oppressing women to put them into lower roles.
Power relations.
It's right, yeah.
Okay,
So,
yes. Yeah.
well, wouldn't it be warranted to have a concern that perhaps women are at this day and age still under that, even though we've moved past some of those necessities of biology, that they're still being held down?
Yeah, so there definitely is that. So the question would be, the presupposition is that whenever there's a power relation, a hierarchical power relation, I'm not saying that's your presupposition, the question, but it's the presupposition of the patriarchal narrative, that's an unjustified one, okay? Now, it depends on how you conceive power, frankly. That's the question. Are there acceptable power relations? This is a question. Is it acceptable sometimes for a man to be in control of a woman, or a woman to be in control of a man, or a male to be in control of a female, or a female to be in control of a male? And the answer is yes, according to feminism. For instance, do mothers have rights over their children? Yes. To what age? Let's say 16, legalistically, right? So that is a situation where you have a matriarch, you have a woman in control of a male, a female in control of a male, depending on how you define child, that's a different case. Is that an acceptable power relation? Yes. How is it defined? Biologically, anatomically, physiologically, emotionally. So, why is it selective then? Who gets to choose what are the acceptable power relations and what are the unacceptable ones? Now, third wave feminism is not problematic, but it's most deconstructionist in its nature, because it says, it usually employs, and I don't want to go into deep philosophy, but the idea that power is like a Foucauldian power relation. So power is everywhere, different conceptions of power. But the question will always go back to what are the acceptable power relations? And who defines them? The question is, are there situations where men are in charge of women? Absolutely. There's no doubt about that whatsoever. Should that be the case? Depends on which context we're talking about. Should a female be in charge of a male? In some cases, yes. Just like a mother is in charge of her child. Yes, and almost everyone agrees to that. Maybe with some exception, by the way, with third wave feminism. So, who defines the power relation? You must have an epistemological way that works mechanistically from first principles to explain to us what is your theory of justice, what is your theory of acceptable power relation, and why this is exploitation. If you don't have that, you don't have an argument. I'm not saying you, but I'm just saying generally, right? If you don't have that, you're just saying this is unacceptable, but to me it's acceptable. You see? So, hopefully, does that, yeah? Okay.
Do we have any questions from the floor? Please.
Okay, so thank you for your talk. I think you answered my question a little bit when you were answering the gentleman's question. So, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So, nowadays we see a lot of Muslim women and men adopting the feminist ideology, and a lot of Muslims are becoming advocates of the feminist discourse through an Islamic paradigm. So this could be, as it was mentioned, that because of the highly patriarchal nature of contemporary Muslim societies, which is coming as a reaction to all of this, so they find solace in accepting the feminist movement and it empowers them. So why is this wrong? Is it wrong, and why is it wrong? And if it is, how would you advise and overcome this?
So I don't think it's always wrong to agree with feminists, and that's definitely not my position, right? And we do, and this lecture might have seemed as if it did come across that way, because I usually try and counter the feminist narrative by giving counter examples and so on. But if I did a lecture on the similarities between Islam and feminism, it would be a lecture which we can easily do, just like we do a lecture on the similarities between Islam and Christianity, for example. The issues are, where should we draw the contradictions, and when there is a contradiction, what do we do in worldview? And my answer to you today is, where there is a contradiction, if a woman or a man in Islam who defines himself as Muslim and they truly believe in God and the Prophet Muhammad and the divine texts, it's not against intersectionalist feminism for them to say, listen, I'm going to put aside this Eurocentric idea of gender equality and I'm going to prioritize the Quranic position. Where, for example, feminists have meetings, or if, for instance, there is campaigns, or there are campaigns which feminists put together, and they define themselves as feminists, for instance, against domestic violence or against some social problems which we can all agree is wrong, we can say, the Quran said, وَتَعَانُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى. Come together in goodness, right? But we have to identify that thing as wrong ourselves. So if someone is doing a charity to help women educate themselves, yes, this is a great thing, you know, especially in developing countries. And we should be leading the way for that ourselves. And feminists can join us, but we can join them, it's not a problem. But the idea is, if in those schools now they're teaching them certain things which you disagree, then it's different. It's a conflict of interest. And where there's a conflict of interest, we have to go with what we believe in, basically. That's what I'm saying. Where there is a conflict of interest, we have to go back to the texts, the sacred texts, the Quran and Sunnah. You see. And that goes to, for example, in Britain now, we have an issue where there's a tension between the LGBT community and the traditionalist Muslim community, especially in Birmingham, because of certain things that they're teaching in schools and so on. And there's a conflict of interest there, right? So the parents are saying, well, we don't want our children to be educated in this way. And the school was saying, but this is part of a new inclusive policy that we have of diversity and so on, British values, which one is right? Or once again, on intersectionalist feminism, who has more of a right, okay, to teach the child? Is it the mother, for instance, or the state? If you put it on that in that paradigm, I think the answer is clear. Even as one of the human rights, in the Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, not that we agree with the phraseology of that document, by the way, which can easily be refuted, yes? There are some good things in it, obviously, but it says that the parent has a right to teach their child whatever they want. So the discourse has to be consistent. You say, when there's a conflict of interest, we must try our level best to go back to what we believe in, and other communities have to accommodate for that. Otherwise, there will be frictions and there will be tension.
So, just to summarize, can you label yourself as a Muslim feminist?
The label itself is problematic because the Quran actually tells us, from an Islamic perspective, you should call yourself a Muslim, yes? It doesn't attach anything to that. So, when you say feminist, what do you mean? The issue is, you're associating yourself, if you do say that, you're associating yourself with a discourse, an academic discourse, that, especially in the second wave sense, attacks the institution of marriage and attacks motherhood quite heavily. Motherhood is attacked. So, you could be seen as disingenuous by doing that. You are academically disingenuous. What do you mean by a Muslim feminist? Do you mean that you believe in gender equality? So why do we need to put feminists there to believe in that? We don't. The thing is, once again, we're bowing to a Eurocentric narrative that we have to label ourselves the way the white man labels himself, with a white woman. That narrative, by the way, Virginia Woolf, who was one of the most prominent feminists in the 30s, she herself said that this term feminism is a despised term. It's a hated term because of its associations, what it's been associated with. Because at that time there were some problematic associations. So for us, why do we want to compound our pre-existing marginalization anyway? As Muslims, we're strangers in the West. By compounding that, by saying we're Muslim feminists, we're making confusion. Or are we doing that so we can try and fit in with the Western narrative? So it's like saying to a feminist, why don't you call yourself a Muslim feminist? They'll say, we don't believe in God. Or they'll say, we don't believe in the Prophet Muhammad. Say, well, but you believe in charity, don't you? Say, yeah, I believe in charity. You believe in, being good to your parents? Yes, I believe in that. That's in the Quran. So do you want to call yourself a Muslim feminist? No, I'm not a Muslim. That's the idea, though. You don't agree with the principles. You see? And it sounds ridiculous. It's like, what are you talking about? But it's only ridiculous when the brown man is asking the white man to call himself something which he calls himself by. But when the white man tells the brown man to call himself what they're calling themselves, we should do it. So no, it is a colonialist narrative which you need to be aware of. It wasn't developed in the Middle East, it wasn't developed in Africa or Southern Asia. It should be avoided.
The question from the floor says, why should a woman, you said the mother has more influence on the children than the father. Why then are Muslim men allowed to marry of another faith, but the women are not?
Because Allah said so. Yes. And remember, our point is that we believe, obviously I'm going to expand on this. If only I could just finish the question like that. But it's not, by the way, the question was poorly phrased because it's not any faith. ولا تنكحوا المشركات حتى يؤمنوا ولا أمة مؤمنة خير من مشركة ولو أعجبتكم. The Quran says, do not marry a polytheist woman even if you like her. And a slave woman who's a believer is better for you, i.e. in marriage, than a polytheist woman. So it's confined to Jews and Christians because they're in Kitab, as the beginning of Surah Al-Ma'idah says. However, even then, the question is why? Well, because of, I can just really end it with one sentence and it will be logically coherent. Because there are psychological, anatomical, biological differences between men and women, and our premise is where there is difference, that should be represented or instantiated in the prescription. Simple as that. Our premise is that where there's a difference, it should not be instantiated in the prescription. We say where there's We're saying similar things should be treated the same, and different things should be treated differently. So the idea is women and men in marriage interact differently to each other. So that is represented with the rulings. And in fact, there has been research that is done actually, which I've recently come across. If this is on YouTube, I'll try and put the research in the description box. I usually say that and forget. So someone remind me, maybe in the comments or something. I lost my phone on one of the Malaysian taxis.
Oh.
Yes. But I was going to say DM me, but I'm not going to be able to reply. There's research that's done that shows that actually assimilation into the husband's religion is a representative trait. So in other words, what does this mean? It means when they did the study, they found that if a woman usually marries a man, and say the man is of X religion, say he's a Jew, and the woman is a Christian, even though it's very unlikely that, this is a very bad example actually. Let's say the man is a Christian and the woman is a Jew, yes? The trends show, with the research that we have, that women are much more likely to convert to the religion of the man. That's just the data that we have at the moment. And remember, one of the maqasid of Sharia, one of the objectives of Sharia is to safeguard someone's deen, someone's religion. So if one of the objectives of the Sharia is to safeguard someone's religion, but you're putting them in a disadvantageous position by allowing a man to have potential influence on her, which could, according to these studies, right, account for a change in her religion, then that would be problematic from our spiritual perspective. From a liberal perspective, they'll say, who cares? If she changes her religion, that's her decision. That's your business. That's not our business. We're not liberals. As simple as that. We don't believe, yes, that the end goal is a choice. We believe that a choice is a means to the end and not the end itself. That's the difference between us and liberals. Where the liberal is instrumental when it comes to liberty and freedom, the Muslim is not instrumental. We have a pathway to a decision that should be made, which is to worship Allah and to follow the prophets, all of the prophets. They say, no, the end goal for us as human beings is just to be able to make the decision. No, that's not our worldview. You shouldn't superimpose that on us. And once again, the reason why someone has that question in the first place is because they have been infiltrated, intellectually infiltrated, by the colonizing ideological propagators who have made liberalism an assumption that should be thought of almost intuitively before asking any question. Liberalism and feminism. Two assumptions, almost as if they're the ultimate objective morality, yet there's no objective way of formulating from first principles these are true ideologies in the first place. There are differences, and the Shara accounts for those differences.
So what does Islam have of a solution for lesbians and gays who might not be attracted to opposite gender at all? What about their rights?
Okay, let's start with the idea of rights. We have a completely different view of rights than the Western liberal discourse. That's point number one. So the idea of rights, understood from a liberal perspective, especially on human rights, which, by the way, human rights was not a term that was used before 1948. Usually it was natural law, natural rights. This goes back to the Stoics, it goes back to the ancient Greeks. But after 1948, this term, human rights, became a buzzword because of the convention, 1948 Convention on Human Rights. So rights are almost always axiomatically determined by what's in that document. So for a lot of liberals and a lot of Westerners, when they talk about rights, they cannot think outside of the prism of the 30 articles that are mentioned in that document. For us, that document is a flawed one, frankly. Why? Where are parents' rights to the children even mentioned in that document? Mother's right to good treatment. First and foremost, I'm giving you an example. That's not mentioned anywhere in that document. We have a different conception of rights. Even communitarians have attacked liberals, individualist liberals, on the idea of rights. Because whenever we talk about rights, we don't talk about responsibilities. And communitarians would argue whenever rights happen, responsibilities happen at the same time. And why is it that the document is always telling you what you're entitled to and and not what you should give? Forget about what you need or what you're entitled to. Let's think about your duties and responsibilities in society. First and foremost, the discussion of the LGBTQ, plus. When we're talking about that, it's a different discussion in different countries. This is a Muslim majority country. And by the way, we had this discussion, I shouldn't maybe mention this, but we had this at the High Office recently, with one of the seniors in this country. Yes, I'm trying to infiltrate. I'm trying to influence policy. Yes. So that was the question I was actually asking you then. And I said that on liberalism, there are two things you need to know. Yes. Number one, if you're invoking human rights, you should know that liberalism, of which human rights is an outgrowth, also has something called the social contract. And the social contract is an agreement between the people of the state and the government. The government offers the people protection, and the protection offer, the people have to follow the laws of the country. On liberalism, that's absolutely fine. That is not contradictory to the first principles of liberalism. And to what extent? To the extent whereby you had prominent liberal thinkers saying that certain sexual things should not be done in public. Even John Stuart Mill said this On Liberty. He said, a man and woman having intercourse in the public realm is not something we can tolerate on liberalism. So if he saw that this was compatible, for example, I'm not just saying that this is his opinion, therefore all of liberalism is like that. No, I'm saying, if this is compatible on his view with liberal principles, then if a country like Malaysia decides that sexual acts between men and men, or men and women in public, should be not allowed, then it's in compliance with the social contract that the subjects of that country should obey that law. Otherwise, you can't invoke human rights here. Human rights are that which don't transcend the social contract, which don't basically go against the social contract. So in other words, it really is a matter of cultural hegemony. The white man has once again defined for us what should be acceptable sexual public practice, and he's forcing that opinion on every other culture that he disagrees with. Look at Uganda, for example. This is a good case study example. Uganda is a country, it's an African country, as you know. The majority of the population in that country, using a majority principle of democracy, by the way, would probably disagree with the idea that men and men should have sexual intercourse in the public realm, or even show affection, sexual affection, or woman and woman, right? So now you have a contradiction between what the people want in that country and what the people have decided in California and London and New York. So should the Ugandan people's will proceed, or should there be something called a homo-nationalistic agenda, which is the idea that they use the contradiction or the tension of LGBT in other cultures which doesn't agree with certain sexual practices as an entrance point to interventionism in certain developing countries. They say, look, it's called homo-nationalism. They say, look at these countries, they outlaw homosexuality, people are not given rights, we need to go in and save them. Even though probably if they'd done a referendum, 95% of the population would say homosexuality shouldn't be practiced in the sexual realm, but we should forego the majority principle on this occasion because the white man has decided, guys. So here, what is to be done? So let us intervene, change the government, do this, do that, influence policy. It's none of your business what the Ugandans do or what they decide. Now it's not the same as saying we should now attack. And by the way, this is really interesting, yes? You know what happened in that situation? The Ugandans were in fact being boycotted because of their policies on LGBT, and that affected infant mortality rates. It affected the children in that country. So here's a conflict of interest that you didn't think about. Whose rights are more important in Uganda? The babies and toddlers that are dying because now the IMF, which is an offshoot of the United States of America, who thinks that they can dominate the world through ideology, that those individuals have decided that they're going to release funding or hold funding or freeze funding or boycott lower developed, so-called developing country like Uganda, which has a knock-on economic effect on children's death. So do those children have more of a right to life on your human rights? Or does a gay man have a right to hold another gay man's right in the street and kiss him in the street? Tell me which is more important in this analysis. So you see, they don't think about all of the factors. And they impose themselves and their will in such a way that not only has hegemonic colonial effects on those countries, but also has, yes, it also has disastrous effects on the lower populations. Yes. Sorry.
But isn't the IMF the people that are funding the, well, they're sending funds to the country, aren't they? So if they decide to ask for them to implement some kind of law, isn't it on them to withdraw or continue with funding?
You have to remember that these countries were colonized, yes? So to what extent do ex-colonized countries, like African countries, like this country in Malaysia, to what extent is it fair to give those countries loans, yes, which you know is going to exceed their GDP per annum rates, that they're not going to be able to pay back because you colonized them, because you did it, your forefathers did it, not you. I'm sorry.
It's different because you involve the social contract with liberalism, right?
Yeah.
That if you are accepting protection from the government can set its laws. Well, if you're receiving a loan from a company or an IMF, right, an institute, then you should accept its laws. Isn't it the same thing?
No, because the thing is, a lot of those governments, there's two kinds of aid, type aid and untype aid.
Yeah.
So those governments, when they're given, we're talking about two things. There's loans and aid, yes? So if we're talking about loans, the loans are actually in the interest of the bank. Who is the beneficiary of the loan? The IMF is the beneficiary of the loan. Basically, they're exploiting the subcontinental Africans, yes? They're seeing that they're weak in economy, take this money, but pay it back to us in double. That's an exploitative practice, right?
That's not their...
Maybe not double, I don't know the
But that's not the
APR.
stated goal of the IMF. Like, the IMF is trying to, in their own ideological way, they're trying to improve the countries that they...
No, they're not. I disagree with that. I think that the IMF is a bank just like any retail bank that tries to make money. It's a profit-maximizing firm. Yes, it is a profit-maximizing firm, and remember, America itself is a capitalistic country. It's not communistic. They don't care about equality when it comes to materialism, when it comes to economics. They want to make money. And they don't care if they have to make money off Africans or Chinese or Malaysians or whatever, the IMF. And as a result of that status, they have a great economic growth rate, which is a model for the rest of the Muslim world. And actually, a lot of it is an ignorant way of arguing. Fallacious way of arguing. And so, something being a social construct, and there was a woman there, and they were talking loudly about virginity, yeah, like the idea of being a virgin. And she's just like nobody. I don't know who she is. She says virginity is a social construct. She's obviously like a proper hardcore feminist, but she doesn't even know what she's talking about. So I said, I thought, okay, really? Virginity is a social construct. So sex is a social construct, like penetrative sex. So rape is a social construct. So you don't complain. No, seriously, that's what happens when you keep pushing things. Yes? Everything is a social construct. Rape is a social construct. Therefore, there's no rape. There should be no criminalization of people when they commit rape. Penetrative, biological, anatomical rape. Because rape can't be defined in any way but anatomical. Yes. How can you rape someone without biology being a part of that or anatomy being a part of that? So if you want to make everything being a social construct, then rape is a social construct. It's the problem. So just invoking that, that's a buzzword for them, isn't it? Social construct. It's a social construct. Well, okay, no problem. Push the letter with them. You'll find that they'll start to crumble in front of you. Well, actually, crumble. No, actually, no. No, don't, please. Seriously, stop. You said it's a social construct. Deal with the consequences of that. You know, you said it. Deal with the consequences of it. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, this kind of thing interests me as well.
Are there any questions from the floor? Yes, please, right over there.
Yeah. So, to what extent can one proclaim as a Muslim, according to the number of texts that one follows in the Quran? And second question, so in a place where a state practices Islamic law, will there be repercussions to people or persons who do not entirely follow an Islamic law, say gender in this case, where they prioritize their gender preference before their religious preference?
Yeah, okay, so the Quran says, to answer your first question, you have to believe in all of the Quran. Yeah? Obviously, interpretation is different, and you have to believe in the hadith as well. So the Quran says, أَفَتُؤْمِنُونَ بِبَعْضِ الْكِتَابِ وَتَكْفُرُونَ بِبَعْضِ. Do you believe in parts of the book and disbelieve in other parts of the book? فَمَا جَزَاءُ مَنْ يَفْعَلُ ذَلِكَ مِنكُمْ إِلَّا خِزْيٌ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. What is the recompense of someone who does that except for humiliation in this world? وَيَوْمِ الْقِيَامَةِ يُرَدُّونَ إِلَىٰ أَشَدِّ الْعَذَابِ وَاللَّهُ بِغَافِلٍ عَمَّا يَعْمَلُونَ. So the ayah continues. It basically says that you have to, the idea is you have to follow everything in the Quran. Yes, if you believe that this is a message from God, that this came down from God to a prophet, then it's submission. You have to submit to every single thing. If you don't agree with that, obviously, you don't have to do anything. And there's a consequence for that, which we discussed 2 days ago, namely the hellfire and so on. So, the second question as to Islamic State. If there's an Islamic governance in a country, and I'm not referring to any specific country because the extent to which Islamic governance is actually defined in particular countries is a matter of political discussion in different countries. But if it's fully Islamic, then clearly there's going to be laws and regulations as to what happens in the public space. Yes? Now, there's an interesting hadith of Umar ibn Khattab, you know, when he was walking and he saw someone drinking alcohol in his house, and he went into the house and he reprimanded him. And he said, this is my space, this is my private space, and he retracted the reprimand. He acknowledged the error in doing that. In other words, what happens between the walls of your own house from an Islamic perspective is something which is your business. Yes? It's something which is your business. So, the extent to which, because a lot of people have this feeling or belief that just by virtue of the fact that you're a homosexual in a Muslim country, and you say, you know, I have these feelings, or you're going to be thrown off the mountain, and you're going to be killed, and you're going to be stoned, and this is false. If someone just says, I have these feelings, then Allah does not burden someone more than they can handle. It's not even sinful for them to have those feelings in the first place. Obviously, enacting those feelings into penetrative or other kinds of sexual modes is what is prohibited in Islam. And doing it in the public sphere may lead to ramification, especially if it's penetrative, and especially if it's between man and man. From an Islamic jurisprudential perspective, it's between woman and woman. It's completely different, by the way. Ibn Qudama, one of the scholars of Islam, he says, he was asked the question, what happens if there is a sexual relationship between a woman and a woman? What's the punishment of that? And he says ta'zir, which is the idea that it's kind of like discretionary consequence according to the imam of that, or the leader of that particular country. So there's a spectrum of different things that could happen, but the idea is that it's all regarding the public sphere. And this is not to condone any sexual intimacy between same-gender people or same-sex people in the private sphere, but it is to say that there cannot be any consequence for that, because they're doing that privately. You see what I mean? And so that's pretty much what we believe in. The idea now that there should be, by the way, we should be very clear, that homosexuals are welcome to explore Islam, to understand Islam, and to interact with Muslims. And there is no barrier to entry. They should not feel pressured. And they should not feel, because frankly guys, homosexuality, yes, it's a sin if it's enacted in the ways that we've talked about, but it's not a greater sin than shirk, for instance. Yeah, shirk is a bigger sin. And we interact with Christians all the time, and Hindus. And that is for us is the pinnacle, the apex of what is a sin in Islam. We interact with them, yes? So the idea, I think there is a taboo, yes, with the homosexual society or minorities in countries, potentially Muslim majority countries, where there is no connection between the two or something. And that should be, those barriers should be broken down a little bit so that communication can happen, because that is the way of the prophets. They would free up the barriers and create communication with people of all backgrounds. No one should feel pressured. No one should feel as if we're marginalizing them or pushing them, you know. And homosexuals are not people in a vacuum. They also can be gay, homosexual Jew, homosexual atheist, homosexual black man, white man, whatever it may be. So it's, once again, going back to that, we can't reduce homosexuality is not the defining factor of a person. And they might not even find that it is for them. Yeah, why do we always have this assumption that all homosexuals assume that the most important thing to them is their sexuality? There could be a very staunch Christian homosexual. I met lots of Christian homosexuals. And they came to me with a completely different paradigm. They came to me saying, I want to get rid of this feeling. Muslims, homosexuals come to me all the time with that kind of discourse. So we always have to think about the categories. And according to the different identifiers, we deal with people accordingly. But the idea is it should be open. And communication should be free. And there should be open arms to all communities, especially in a country like this. That's why I believe they shouldn't feel, people of a sexual orientation, in particular, they should not feel as if they're being marginalized in any Muslim majority country. Because if they do feel like that, especially if they're not Muslims, how are they going to accept or understand Islam? And you can't punish them, and you can't abuse them, and you can't do anything to them. What are you going to do? Just because they say you're holding a man's hand, you're going to start hitting them? Seriously, what? They're acting a bit, in your words or your idea, effeminate. We're going to hurt them? No, you're not going to do that. The only thing you have the power to do is talk to them and be nice. Your greatest weapon is kindness in that context, and that's the right thing for Muslims to do, by the way, especially with non-Muslim people. Yeah.
Do you have any follow-up? Thank you. Yeah. So in the Malaysia context, apparently in Islam there is a sin for homosexual sex, and there will be repercussions to Muslims in the legal context, and as opposed to smoking by Muslims. And I was wondering if the preference of the punishment for these two sins, do you agree with that?
Well, I mean, once again, I'm not really totally familiar with the Sharia courts in this country, so I can't make a specific, and I can't make give a specific opinion on that, because it wouldn't befit the context. Smoking is haram, according to the vast majority of scholars. There obviously are dissidents to that, saying it's makruh and whatever, but that's a minority opinion which really shouldn't be considered, especially as we know it has all these health problems and so on. But depends now, because if you're saying it's to Muslims, then obviously they contracted to that particular ruling. Because if it is, then it's an expression of their own choice. Because when you say I'm a Muslim, what are you saying? You're saying I submit my will to God. And through what understanding is that? Through the Quran and the Sunnah. Through whose interpretation? That could be different, yeah? Depending on who's interpreting the books. So you're doubly contracted as a Muslim, especially if there is a Sharia element of the state. Because you're contracted by a social contract, but also you're contracted to Allah. So obviously, if the person is choosing to be part of that, and they have already, or even if they don't choose, frankly, to be part of that, but they identify as Muslims, they're getting the benefits of being Muslims in this country, then surely that should be something which is acceptable. If they are judged according to the rules of Islam in these matters and other matters. So it doesn't contradict anything. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the floor? Yes, please.
I've lived in a Muslim Arab country for the majority of my life. And undoubtedly, it is a male-dominated society. I don't think there's anything wrong of being in a male-dominated society in and of itself. The problem is how this manifests in terms of misogyny, and I use quotes here because there's a lot of connotations to the word now. What would you advise the common person who can't really change society at a glance? What would you advise us in a way to how would you advise us to improve ourselves in the society that we live in without having to resort to the extreme that is feminism?
Okay, so that's a good question. You know, the Quran gives us a great answer to this, and there's a different hierarchization from a Quranic perspective than there is in a capitalistic liberal one, okay? So on capitalism and liberalism, the idea is the more powerful you are, and power is defined usually in economic terms, and sometimes in terms of responsibility, the more important you are, yeah? So the more value you have in society, the more effect you can have on society, and so on. And so usually the second wave liberal would say, give you the advice, for example, and give everyone the advice, especially women, they'd say, make sure you educate yourselves, which is a good thing, by the way, but also that education is usually instrumental to you securing a position, which is career type position, and you're at the top of your class in that particular thing. Try and make it, to the top of that hierarchy in that organization, make it in parliament, make it as president, and so on and so forth, yes? From an Islamic perspective, that's not what we believe. We believe in Surah Al-Mujadala, it's chapter 58 of the Quran, يرفع الله الذين أوتوا العلم منكم والذين آمنوا منكم والذين أوتوا العلم درجات. يرفع الله الذين آمنوا منكم والذين أوتوا العلم درجات. That Allah, He raises among you the ones who have believed and the ones who have been given knowledge in degrees. If women truly, and I do agree that they should, want to have an impactful, effective kind of effect on society, then the best thing to do is to seek knowledge. This is it. And from an Islamic perspective, there is no barrier for a woman to seek knowledge, comparative to a man. So in other words, the best way is to seek knowledge. Because when you have knowledge, you have something someone else, you know something someone else doesn't know. That puts you at an extreme advantage over them, especially if you have specialized knowledge. And the more you are specialized in fields of knowledge, the more society will be forced to seek your consultation. And not only will your consultation be beneficial from a religious or spiritual perspective, but it will be beneficial from an economic perspective as well, and a political one, which we don't completely disregard. So, if I were to summarize the answer to that question in 2 words, it would be seek knowledge. Because when you have knowledge, especially specialized knowledge, it puts you at an advantage over and above people that don't have that knowledge, and it allows you to contribute to a discourse. Now, what's really interesting is if you look at feminism, the irony of it is that most of its presuppositions are based upon the works and the philosophies of men. Like liberal feminists base their feminism on liberalism, which is male-dominated. And in fact, I don't think there was any notable major scholar of liberalism for at least 300-400 years after John Locke or Thomas Hobbes. So a lot of feminists, most I would probably say, feminists in the Western world are liberal feminists, and they base their ideas. Now, I'm not saying just because it's wrong, this generic fallacy in and of itself. However, what I am saying is that it doesn't mean just because you have presuppositions which are based on male ideas that it's wrong, in fact. So you might have a society which is male dominated, take the good from that, try and contribute to that, and also obviously try and get specialized knowledge such that society will force you to contribute, or you will force society to be a contributor. One of the two things will happen, inshallah.
Yeah, follow up, please.
Yes. So, say I decide to improve my political knowledge. Generally, in any government, there's bound to be a shura, so a council, a parliament, so on and so forth. In Islam, is it permissible for a woman to be an advisor, a counselor, a parliament member, even if she isn't the leader or the party advocate?
Even by the way, leader, there's a difference between khilafa amma and wilaya, which is a big discussion. Now, the hadith which is invoked by Abu Bakr, لا يولي قد خاب قوم ولوا امرأته, yeah, which is that the hadith that the nation has failed if they put a woman in charge. It was talking about, in context of the Persian Empire at that time, they put a certain woman in there, and it was talking in that context. However, most scholars use that hadith now and discuss, can it be the case that a woman can be a leader or not? Even a leader, yes? Now, we have to differentiate between al-khilafa al-amma, which is the caliphate, which I don't think we don't even have. One day, inshallah, yeah. Maybe Malaysia will lead the way. Let's have this way. You don't know. Anyway, the point is, the difference between khilafa amma and wilaya. So, there is a difference of opinion in regards to wilaya, can a woman lead or not. There is the opinion that she can lead in this. And Mawardi, when he talks in his book, Al-Ahkam al-Sultaniyya, which is a book talking about the prerequisites for a leader, he puts 9 prerequisites for a Khalif. And one of them actually is to be a Qurashi, to be from Quraysh and so on. So there are specific parameters for a Khalif, but the parameters are minimized when it comes to leadership in localities. So definitely in Bab Awla, if we're talking about Shura members, this is in the Sunnah because Salama and so on, she was in the Shura of the Prophet when he was making political decisions. The point is, it should be based on merit. Yeah, if you have something to offer, you should be listened to. Absolutely. And there's no doubt about that whatsoever. So I would say, yes, we should aim high in that regard. But once again, let's not fall into that narrative that being in an MP or a political representative is the most influential and important thing you could do as a woman. Probably you'll have possibly a more lasting effect being a mother. I know it sounds odd to the ear, but the truth is this. I mean, think about this, yeah? When a woman has more children, right, and we know that if she has more children, then she's going to have influence over those children, right? Like, for example, if you have someone who's a woman, that she's working in a certain, firm, yes? And she's the manager of the firm, and she manages 3 people. And now, let's say she manages 5 people. Most would say that that is her right or her responsibilities have increased. That's promotion of some sorts, yes? But when a mother has more children, no one sees it in the same way. But her influence has also increased, and her responsibilities have also increased. Because they have they've literally sanctified the public spaces, and they have demoted the domestic space. When you say domestic, it has a bad taste in your mouth. Housewife. Ah. Mr. What? What do you do for a living? Housewife. Ah. Homemaker. House husband. Yes. So obviously, connotations are an important thing. Stigma is attached to mothers, and that's largely because of the feminist discourse. We do have to kind of disassemble that a little bit.
Thank you very much. So there's a question on the floor that says, Islamically, should transgender people be treated as the gender they identify as, or the gender they were assigned at birth?
Well, there's a difference between, by the way, like for instance, a hermaphrodite and a transgender person. So a transgender person, at the end of the day, you can do all you want in terms of. What I don't understand, I'll be honest with you guys, yes? The third wave idea is that anatomical difference has no, some would say, I'm not going to generalize it, but some say, like, for example, the penis is a social construction. Yeah? Seriously. Because at the end of the day, they say that biology is a social construct. This is how Judith Butler can be read, this is how a lot of those individuals can be read. But why not understand if it's a social contract, why cut it off? Or why take it, why reassign yourself? Because all you're doing is you're buying into the narrative that biology matters by doing that. And by the way, this is connected to something which I found really interesting as well, which is FGM. You know, female genital mutilation. You know, and there's Eurocentric definitions of what FGM is. So why can't we define FGM as sexual reassignment surgery? Because at the end of the day, it's the same kind of entailment. You're changing the body. Now you'll say, well, because there's consent there. But even according to their definitions of FGM, if an Ethiopian woman goes and, for example, has a clitoridectomy, which is getting part of her clitoris removed, for cosmetic reasons. By the way, in the culture, many, for example, East Africans would think it's a cultural beautification to have a clitoridectomy. Yes, even though we find that, some of us will find that weird or something, yes? But let's say they do that. That kind of FGM is referred to as FGM, even though she has given consent. And there's other things like labiaplasty and these things. I'm not sure if you've heard of them. Hymenoplasty and these things. I'm not going to be graphic here. But sorry to say, I mean, this happens in the UK, the idea that a woman wants to make her vagina, sorry, this is going to sound very crude, more tight, okay? Or reconstruct the hymen so that it seems as if she's, you know, a virgin again. Even though virginity is supposedly a social construction. Right? But isn't that FGM? Why shouldn't that be called FGM? Yes? Why is it because of the Eurocentric definition that FGM is only when the Africans do it? Yes? If you're saying, okay, but they're forced, okay, no, I'm not talking about forced. According to the studies that have been done and the WHO definition, yes? I don't know why I was talking about FGM, what was the initial question, sorry? Oh yeah, sorry, yeah, you're talking about transgender. So the idea is, I find it ironic that a transgender is buying into the biological narrative by doing SRS. Now they might feel like, okay, they want to get rid of it for personal reasons and so on. From an Islamic perspective, they'll still have, and from a biological perspective, you're always going to be XX or XY chromosome. You can't take that out of your bloodstream and you can't take that out of your body. You do whatever you want. So we would define it like that. However, if someone genuinely is born for biological reasons and has both genitalia, that's a different case altogether. They look at it, the experts will tell us what is more dominant and so on. There's a whole process of determination there. But when you do it to yourself, that's something else. However, once again, we have to treat those people with respect. Yes? Wallahi. A lot of them, by the way, if you look at how many of those people, yes, have regretted what they've done and as a result have committed suicide. The amount of people that regret doing that surgery is probably more than any other surgery in the world because of what it does to your body. And they feel as if they've ruined their lives. A lot of them slip into depression, a lot of them commit suicide. In a way, it's a perfect opportunity to introduce for them their true identity, because that's what they're looking for all the time. And their true identity is they're submitting to Allah and they're submitting to the rules of God and so on. So it could be an easy slippage into a dawah conversation And for me personally, if they say, can you refer to me as he or she, or I can say whatever they want. I give them the benefit of the doubt. I don't know. I say, look, you're a boy, you know. What's the point? Where's the point? It's you can compromise on this issue. Say, or try and be gender neutral in your pronouns. Seriously, say, I speak in the third person or do whatever, but you don't have to, attack them, press them on these matters to make them feel uncomfortable. It doesn't make sense. Just establish tawheed with them, and Islam from that perspective is accommodating, just like it's accommodating to all human beings. The Quran says, وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ الدَّاعِ إِذَا دَعَانِ. That if the slave asks about me, then I am near. I answer the caller of the call, the call of the caller when he calls. So it's non-discriminatory. Anyone can interact with Muslims, understand what Islam is, and so on, unless they're harming you. The Quran says, لا ينهاكم الله عن الذين لم يقاتلوكم في الدين ولم يخرجوكم من دياركم أن تبروهم وتقسطوا إليهم إن الله يحب المقسطين. Allah does not forbid you of dealing justly with those who don't try and fight you and take you out of your homes. So if they don't fulfill these two categories, be nice to them. وَقُولُوا لِلنَّاسِ حُسْنًا, and say good things to people. لِلنَّاسِ, it's generic. يَرْحَمُ مَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ, the hadith. يَرْحَمُكُم مَنْ فِي السَّمَاءِ. Be merciful to all of those. Jordan Peterson thing, and there's a guy, like a public intellectual called Jordan Peterson, where he's like, I'm not going to call it, he made a big deal out of it, and freedom of speech, and be quiet, man. You don't have to make a big deal out of this. Seriously, speak to them the way they want to be treated, and you can make your point when the conversation matures. And I think that's the best strategy, inshallah.
Now this is a constructed question. Part A says, why should a woman ask for permission from her father or husband when she needs to leave the house, but a man does not need to do the same? A. B says, why are men in Islam permitted to have multiple wives if the wife is impotent?
I'll just say that, remember, the presupposition here is that they should be treated equally, even despite the difference. That is the hidden assumption of that question. That men and women should be treated similarly, equally in all cases. Despite biological, anatomical, physiological, and psychological difference, we say no. And these are examples that he just mentioned of situations in which the all-knowing one has decided that actually men have something that women don't have. And that's why the Quran says, وَلَا تَتَمَنَّوا مَا فَضَّلَ اللَّهُ بِهِ بَعْضُكُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. Do not wish what Allah has given some of you over others. لِلرِّجَالِ نَصِيبٌ مِمَّا اكْتَسَبُوا وَلِلنِّسَاءِ نَصِيبٌ مِمَّا اكْتَسَبْنَ. That for men is a portion of what they have earned, and for women is a portion of what they have earned. وَاسْأَلُ اللَّهَ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ. Ask Allah from His fadl. So the question of leaving the house is unrestricted in the question. So they say no, there is definitely, it's not like that. Because what if she wants to go to the masjid? We know the situation, hadith of Prophet Muhammad where it says, لا تمنع إماء الله مساجد الله. Don't let the women slaves of Allah, women, Muslim women, don't prevent them from going to the mosques. And there are 5 prayers. And they stretch across the whole day. So if a woman wants to go to every single prayer, what's the problem? You can't stop her from going to pray. But we know the story of Umar ibn Khattab. For example, I'm just giving you an example, but there are other examples, right? Umar ibn Khattab, his son, he said, I'm going to stop my wife from going to the mosque. He said, I'm going to. He said, what? He said, the Prophet said this and you're saying this. He got very angry with him. And there was a wisdom behind that, by the way. Why did he say, لا تمنع إماء الله مساجد الله? Because when a woman is introduced to the community 5 times a day, if abuse is happening, if seclusion is happening, if she feels lonely, and all of those factors, then that's remedied by the fact that she has ample opportunity to leave the house without permission of the husband throughout the day, just 5 times a day. Now, what about if she wants to go and meet her parents? Well, that's a faridah. It's an obligation upon her to meet her parents. So don't go to your mom's house. What do you mean? Silat al-Rahim. And the scholars have said no. I mean, you can't tell her, I'm going to go to mom. What about if she wants to go and see her own child? And he's with someone else. I mean, there's too many exceptions of the rule. And we know that the situation of the Sahabiyat was that they used to interact in communities. Yes, though, there are situations where the man can decide in Islam that don't go out in this time. Don't go out in this time. And that makes a lot of sense, to be honest with you. Because if, especially, you want a man to protect you, which is the case in war, then you have to follow the commands of the protector. It's like a general in the army. That's how it works. If you actually are in the army and the general says to you, go here, go there, do this, do that, and you say no, and then you get shot dead, then it's actually your responsibility for that. Now the man has an obligation to protect in Islam. This should be made very clear. The man in Islam is a protector. And by the way, if you think about a lot of people, and this is correct, it's true, they say women are unpaid, for example, for the most part, they're unpaid homemakers, chefs, because they make food at home and so on. They're unpaid, caretakers because they're chicks, and so on. It's true. It's very true. And by the way, in Islamic jurisprudence, a woman doesn't have to make the food for the man and these things in the way that, it's true that, like a slave would and so on. And there is a complex discussion on that. I'm not saying that unrestrictedly for those people, because there are contexts in which a woman, if she's not doing anything, she's staying at home, now she wants to take the feminist rights. What do you mean? You're not working. You're not going to work, and you're not going to make the food. No, seriously, that's not fair. What are you talking about? You want to take feminist rights and Islamic rights. It doesn't work like that. Because in feminism, you'd be working. You'll be doing it 50-50, my friend. So if you want to be a feminist, go out and work. No, seriously. However, she doesn't have to do the housework in that way that people think that she does. However, the point I was making initially is, but a man also is something which is unpaid. In most cases, a man is an unpaid security guard, in the sense that he is expected to socially operate as a protector 24 hours a day. Now, usually that is the case, sometimes it isn't, but most of the times it is. And war is an ample example of that, we've mentioned it many times. But generally speaking, if there is a harm, men are expected to deal with that harm. A burglar comes into the house. Who's going to deal with that, right? In most cases, it would be expected that the man, and that should be like that actually, because of the anatomical differences. And but if you want the protection, what if in that context it says, stay here? I'm going to go outside and do this and do that. You can follow that command. Because you're concerned for your protection, if you have children for their protection, and so on. So if that chain of command is broken, it's as dramatic as if it would be broken in a military context. In some cases, obviously not in all cases, yes? So if the hierarchy, and there is a hierarchy, this is what we're saying clearly today. There are chains of command in Islam. If the hierarchy is broken at certain critical moments, it will endanger the woman. And we cannot pretend that women have the same ability to protect men as men have to protect women. Not even feminists pretend this anymore. So let's get with the program and let's be honest with ourselves. There are certain things that you have a right to, but also certain responsibilities that you have, and those are predicated upon your ability as a human being. Hopefully that answers the question. I'm not sure if I want to do well with that one.
Not only that one. Okay. So, are there any questions from the floor?
But I think that hadith was not Umar ibn Khattab, his son was Abdullah ibn Umar, his son.
Oh, sorry, I apologize, yes. So, yes, good correction. The hadith was not Umar ibn Khattab to his son, it's Abdullah ibn Umar to his son. Jazakallah khair. Yes.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So my question is, many Muslims in the West are collectively and consistently attacked for not assimilating to quote-unquote liberal Western values. So is there a place for Muslims in the Western world at all?
Well, that's the thing. So the question presupposes that Muslims can't be Westerners in the first place, right? And the thing is that marginalizes them in the sense that how could they not be when they're born in that country and they've lived in that country, they can speak the language of that country and so on. They should be able to enjoy the privileges of those other people that do the same thing. So I think in a nutshell this answer is that there should be, we do have a dual kind of identification as Muslims, and on liberalism that should be tolerated. And if it's not, frankly, it will just create more tensions in societies. So I think that it's a good question. There are tensions, but they must be reconciled, and that must take the form of the authorities accommodating for minority groups, just like the Jewish community. Like the Jewish community have done a great job in being able to frankly get their way on a lot of issues that Muslims have not been able to do yet. And it's seen as a freedom of religion. We have to push that argument. We have to be able to establish ourselves in similar ways as communities like the Jewish community.
Okay, there's a question from the floor that says, why does a murderer's victim's family get to choose a punishment for the murderer in the Islamic court and not the judge?
So so in Islam, the capital punishment, the punitive law of capital punishment is different to the Western understanding of it. So in Islam, you have someone, so for example, is killed, and it's an intentional murder, then the family member of that, the closest kin, and they'll probably go for what you call the asaba, the male family members and so on, they will decide if the person has to pay blood money or whether they should be killed as well. And so the question is, why is that the case? Because it's retribution, frankly. And it allows a space for forgiveness. And the Quran is clear that forgiveness is better. So in an ideal world, no one would be executed for killing anyone. But sometimes there's cases where you have a serial killer, and the Qadi, the ruler of that state, says, you know what, even though you have the right to, or the Qadi, the judge, or the ruler of the state, the Imam, can say, actually this guy's a serial killer. If we leave him out in the open, he's going to kill more and more people, so I'm going to overrule the judgment of the king, and we'll go to impose capital punishment on that individual. So it really is a matter of retribution, and Islam generally believes an eye for an eye, frankly. And there's a verse in the Quran like that. We believe. And someone says, but hold on, brother. If it's an eye for an eye, the whole world will be blind. Have you heard this before? Yeah. Well, actually, no, because they'll have one eye. It's true, isn't it? If there's an eye for an eye, they'll still have the other eye, isn't it? This is dumb people. Wallahi, they say some things, they don't think about it. They have monocular vision. They wouldn't think with two eyes. And why do we assume that if it's an eye for an eye, everyone's going to go for the eyes? Yes? Why not the ear or something, or the throat, or the body? Why is everyone going to stab someone else in the eye? What kind of thing is that? So, for example, we have a case in England, where they have acid. You know, they throw acid on people in East London and other parts. I'm not going to just say East London, but other parts of England. They throw acid, it destroys the face. Wallahi, Islam will say, throw the acid back on this guy, because what better punishment to what you have done to that person than having to deal with the same consequences that he has to deal with. Think about it. That makes it. Instead of putting him in prison, wallahi, put him in prison for 5 years. You have not given him the justice there. Put the acid on his face, just like you put the acid on this guy's face. Should be fair. And it's kind of intuitive justice. If you ask a woman or a man, who's just been walking, minding their own business, and all of a sudden some punk throws acid in their face, what's the reason for that? Why are you doing that? You destroyed their face. Okay, go to prison for 3 years, good behavior, 2 years, and come out. That's not fair, man. Seriously, that's not fair. Let's bring you to a place, I'll get a bucket, I'll put the acid on him, just like you put the acid on him. And it just makes sense. So I think that we have our own unique understanding of retributive justice, and to be honest with you, ask the victims. I remember one person, wallahi, I told you before, I used to work in the city and in central London. And he was talking to me about hudud, and he's talking about cutting the hands. He said, look, it's barbaric, cutting the hand. I started explaining to him that, I said to him, look, there's so many conditions that have to be met. Like, I think a Subki mentions like 20 or 30 conditions or something. And it makes sense because it's actually a very strong deterrent and it's effective. And it's not just if you have you steal an olive or something, and you're hungry and you're going to cut your hand. This is the Orientalist image. But it's an effective measure. And so someone will say, oh, this guy was saying this is diabolical law. And then, yes, guess what happened to him? Something goes, I can't remember, I think it was his wallet or something. He got stolen. This was maybe a month later or something. I was working with him. And the way he came to the office swearing and this and that, that's happening. I was like, and then he started saying things. I'm shocked. He's like, if I find that guy, I'm going to kill him. Now you're going over the bar, brother. You're telling me about cutting the hand, and now you're saying if I find the guy, I'm going to kill him. He said, no, it's very angry. But just in these cases, just ask the victims. A lot of the time, they'll realize what justice entails at that point. And so I think to answer the question is, there is an idea of retributive justice in Islam, and once again, do a survey. If you really want to be a sociologist, not you, but other people, do a survey on victims, mothers who have lost their child because her child was walking in the wrong area and some guy wanted to steal his phone, stab him, kill him. Why? You think you have the right to kill someone because you want an item that they have? How do you solve a problem like that? Put more police in the area? No. Let's put capital punishment there. Some people don't care to go to prison. They're happy to go to prison. Some people want to go to prison. They had a good time in prison. Look at the prisons in Norway. Well, some people say, I heard that prisons in Norway, someone came out and said, I was in a relationship in prison in Norway. I had a boyfriend. I think it's mixed. What kind of prison is that? Some guy will come from abroad just to go to their prisons. Come on, man. This is we make a joke out of the criminal justice system. We have to give them rehabilitation. Rehabilitation for what? They're criminal. Give them the punishment. Teach them the lesson. Hey. No, it doesn't look like that.
There's a question from the floor that says, according to Islam, 2 women's testimony is equal to 1 man's. Please explain the wisdom behind this. How is this equality?
It isn't. It simply isn't. I have never argued for the economic premise. That's what makes me untouchable today for these things. Because you say, how is it equality? It simply isn't. But it's not true in all cases. And in fact, it's not true in the most important of cases. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. There's a difference between riwayah and shahada. Riwayah is narration. For example, narration of hadith, which is narrating hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you are telling me what the Prophet said. Based on your testimony, I will follow this law for the rest of my life. And in this case, 1 man is 1 woman, by the way. This is the most important case. So, what is this referring to? أَن تَضِلَّ أَحْدَاهُمَا فَتَذَكِّرُ أَحْدَاهُمَا الْأَخْرَ. In Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter 2, I think verse 283 or something like this. The longest ayah of that. The whole ayah is the Quran, so the whole ayah is the whole page is the ayah. And it's talking about certain transactions, financial transactions and so on. How can we understand those How do we understand this? We understand this by saying simply this. We say simply, it is true that for the most part, there is a 2-to-1 ratio between man's testimony, shahada, not narration, and the woman's one. So you say this is unfair. I've heard enough. I'm going to leave. Okay, now hold on. There's something to this. Because we talked about rights and responsibilities. We talked about rights and responsibilities. Now, there's a really weird hidden assumption here. That being a shahid or a witness, not a rawi, being a witness is a sought after position. This is not a sought after position, by the way. Being a shahid, being a witness, is a responsibility which can eventually, in Islamic law, lead to your persecution, punishment. And for instance, if 4 men witness a sexual act being done, yes, between man, that's what is required, 4 testimonies, 4 witnesses. And 3 of them say X, and 1 of them says Y. I saw, and which is what happened, by the way, with Abu Bakr and Mughira at the time of Umar bin Khattab. He said, all 4 of them came, and he said, Abu Bakr said, I saw sorry to be explicit, the penetration happening. 3 witnesses said the same thing. 1 witness said no. I saw it, but I didn't see the penetration happening. So all 4 were persecuted. All 4 were persecuted with whipping. Because in Islam, there's strict laws when it comes to punitive laws. Now, if that was women, if they had the same ability or responsibility in this case, then the feminists would be arguing, or maybe some human rights, well, look how you're whooping the woman for doing something they didn't do. Yeah. How are you whooping them like that for doing something they didn't even do? Someone will argue, well, if you have 3 women and 1 man, if you have 3 women and 1 man, well, in this case, the woman would not be whipped. If you have 3 women, the woman would not be whipped. So, in short, Islam safeguards a woman's propensity to being persecuted for something they didn't do because of, you could argue, anatomical and biological reason. In the end of Surah Al-Ma'idah, it's really interesting, by the way. In the end of Surah Al-Ma'idah, I think someone actually tried to refute me. I made this argument before, and someone tried to refute me on this. They said, what about if you have 2 women and 1 man? But the guy didn't know that you need 4. It doesn't work like that, right? So a woman would not be punished in that context. So, in Surah Al-Ma'idah, at the end of the surah, it talks about how you get the people that you're going to interrogate for witness testimony. And it talks about a rigorous process of interrogation. And if they're lying, then punishment and all those things. So why would a woman want that position? It's not a nice position. It's a position which has many severe entailments, many of which have ramifications. And it will produce, by the way, a lot of societal bad effects. Imagine your daughter, for instance, being whipped for telling the truth. But everyone in that cohort, or in that particular group of people, wasn't telling the truth, and so therefore she had to be implicated in that. So the reason why Islam has that strict criteria is so that people don't, especially in the case of murder, for instance, yes, that the case against the murderer is a justifiable one. And you might say, but someone is being whipped without doing anything, how is that just? We say that is the lesser of 2 evils, because otherwise someone will be killed. Could potentially be killed because of your testimony. So by not completely excluding, but by limiting the way in which female witnesses interact with those particular consequences, what happens is they are less susceptible to penal punishment. And that's why, going back, the presupposition here is that rights are afforded to human beings and everyone has rights. But there is also responsibility. So being a witness being a rawi, by the way, a narrator, which is, as we said, more honorable, much more honorable, and much more important, has no, if you make a false riwayah, they'll call you a kadhab, they'll call you a liar. They'll call you a liar, that's it. You won't be whipped or anything like that. No, you won't. They'll just call you a liar, mudallis, whatever, you're categorized, you're not going to be accepted, your testimony. But if you're a witness, a shahid, there are some serious legal ramifications, and Islam, you can say, خفف على المرأة. It made it easier for the woman not to be as susceptible to those preconditions. So I think if we look at the question, the presupposition is that rights are all that's involved, and in fact we know responsibility is involved as well. When you put both together, you realize, actually, maybe I don't want to be a witness. Yes.
Thank you very much for your... I'll have to kindly ask you to be entertained by the speaker, inshallah, right after this talk, as we went way too over the bar with regards to time.